The trouble I have with 1970s free jazz is that it's too free, really, for my understanding. If you've got a trio up there on the bandstand playing and there's no structure to what they're playing, how can they play together? You don't know what the person next to you on the bandstand is about to play, so you can't play with them because they could be playing anything. And so that's my major listening problem with free jazz, is that you get a trio, if it's a trio, of people up there doing their own thing and not playing together. So that's a problem. And it's appropriate that this reading from The Rough Guide to Jazz, 100 Essential CDs, about Anthony Braxton, is a solo album by him or by himself. And I'm not reading this one, well, I'm reading it because it's in the book, but not because that's a good one to start with. I'll tell you later on much better ones to start with if you are a disabled jazz listener and need a wheelchair or crutches to get to the next stage. Well, there are much better, much more accessible versions of Anthony Braxton that you could listen to. So I'll read from this jazz book, and this is Anthony Braxton, and the CD is called For Alto, F-O-R, not F-O-U-R, For Alto, and it was recorded in 1968, and it's just Braxton alone on the alto saxophone. And it says, revising basic notions about instrumentation in jazz was one of the great challenges musicians tackled in the post-free jazz period. Without the tacit assumption of a front line backed by a rhythm section, a brave new world of formats emerged, including drummerless groups and all percussion ensembles, saxophone quartets, chamber nonettes, and gargantuan orchestras. The concept of playing unaccompanied jazz on reed instruments wasn't new when Anthony Braxton recorded For Alto in 1968. Precedents included Coleman Hawkins' celebrated 1948 piece Picasso, and earlier the 1960s bass clarinet versions of God Bless the Child by Eric Dolphy. There had even been a full-length solo saxophone album by Bengt Fripp Nordstrom, issued earlier in 1968. But Braxton really put the format on the map. He recorded himself privately and then issued his findings on Chicago's Delmark Records as part of a historical, crucial series documenting the music of the emerging Association for the Advancement of Creative Musicians, AACM. For Alto proved beyond contention what a rich menu one could derive from a lone saxophone. That's if the lone saxophonist is a complete genius and brilliant, absolutely wonderful. But if it's an ordinary saxophonist, then it will get a bit boring. Long unavailable, Braxton once voiced the fear that it would appear only as a memorial release. But everything's on YouTube now, including that. The double LP was recently reissued as a single CD. Its sound quality is amateurish with serious distortion problems, but even heard against the backdrop of brilliant subsequent solo sax records by Evan Parker, Julius Hemphill, Steve Lacy and Joe McPhee, Braxton's remains one of the boldest statements of independence ever waxed. It kicks off with a 37-section lyrical snippet dedicated to multi-instrumentalist Jack Gill, followed by a merciless 10-minute dedication to John Cage that's anything but silent. The track should be enough to disprove the frequent characterization of Braxton as excessively brainy. And he certainly was very, very brainy. He did everything. And he called all his tunes tune number 1, 2, 3, 4. And he's all brilliant man. It is corporeal music, forceful and sweaty, straight from the gut, displaying an ecstatic overdrive, the ferocity of which rivals Albert Ayler and Peter Brotzmann. A piece for Cecil Taylor contains surprisingly boppish, nearly bluesy phrasing, and I don't know why it's surprising, because this man, Anthony Braxton, can play anything at all. He's a good bop player, and I'm sure he's a good traditional jazz player as well. Here you can taste Braxton's special choppy staccato flows, his personal form of groove, evident on the many records which he interprets where he interprets standards. Seek out, for prime example, his Charlie Parker project, 1993. Dedicated to Susan Axelrod, is a post-Dolphy ballad, melodic lines stretched into unforeseen shapes, barely containing themselves, suddenly gushing forth in a cascade of arpeggios. And Anthony Braxton has terrific technique. He couldn't be accused of being a faker at all. He has so much technique. Absolutely wonderful man. Braxton is always attendant to structure, and that is what I meant about having no structure for free jazz. So he wasn't really a free jazzer, to my mind. He had his own style, but not free jazz, I don't think. Anyway, you can contradict me on that if you want. His compositions for ensemble, particularly the quartet with Marilyn Crispell, for instance, on the album Willisau Quartet, 1991, embedded imagination, improvisation and experimentation in a flexible but finite context of organisation. For alto, Braxton explores the extreme parts of the alto, assembling a checklist of materials that he investigates with a scientist's rigour. And I think it's just that he could play it all. He had no trouble down at the bottom of the horn, way up high on it, or doing anything with it at all. He had so much technique, or has so much technique, because he's not dead. He's still going. And although this was early on and you expect somebody to be burnt out, he isn't. He's still going. And he's really great. The next track on to artist Murray Pillars, he uses trills in a myriad ways, sweet flutters oscillating between disjunct notes with rude interjections. To My Friend Kenny McKenney combines grumbling low notes, piercing multiphonics and split tones, because that's how he played, cataloguing a set of harshest sax effects. Braxton's interest in clarinetist Jimmy Jufrey is evident on Dedicated to Anne and Peter Allen, a study of low dynamic intensity that involves breathy noises and keypad sounds. The final piece, dedicated to violinist Leroy Jenkins, is a 20-minute landmark full of unlike elements, halting silences, indelicate honks and squeals, whispering love notes, all abruptly juxtaposed. Braxton has made self-documentation a priority. He's recorded alone periodically over the last 30 years, continuing to hone his germinal ideas. But for alto it remains his great solo masterpiece in the rough. And it is a marvellous solo piece if you're into alto saxophones and you're not constrained to bebop or trad jazz. If you listen to him with open ears, then that's good. But it's not the best place to start. I've been listening to him a bit on YouTube, and he's absolutely sensational. So a couple of the recordings I've listened to was Anthony Braxton Quartet at Montreux in I can't read that because I tore off the edge of the page. And the other one is Anthony Braxton 19 Standards. Both of these are brilliant. Both are accessible for somebody in straight ahead jazz. And he is such a wonderful, absolutely complete musician. I was reading in another book about him, where his compositions range from small groups to massive orchestras, and there's one that contains 4 orchestras all playing stuff, and he is wonderful. So my apologies to 1970 and to free jazz. Well, not to free jazz, because I don't think Anthony Braxton is a free jazzer, but he's got so much technique. I'm absolutely in awe of him. Anyway, thank you for listening.